we ask that you silence your mobile phone and turn them off, please. Or put them on vibrate or whatever, so that we can begin our program. We could get you to move up to the front some. That would really help us out a lot. First 3 rows, I'm being told.
There's a few seats over here.
My training and my background has always taught me that when you begin to do anything, that you recognize our Savior, Jesus Christ. So at this point, I'm going to do a short prayer. If you bow your head. Good morning, dear Heavenly Father. We come in your precious name in this place and at this time and this date to pay homage to those pioneers that have paved the way for the city of Little Rock, the state of Arkansas, for this country. We ask that you be with us as we deliberate issues and concern, and let us go away with a better understanding of who we are and what we are and what contribution have been made to this society. In the name of Jesus we pray, amen. First of all, on behalf of Leon Russell, Chairman of the Board of the NAACP, Attorney Derrick Johnson, Interim President and CEO, and to the late L.C. and Daisy Bates of the NAACP, I bring you greetings. To Mark Stoller, our mayor, to City Manager Bruce Moore, the City Board of Directors of Little Rock, to Skip Rutherford of the Clinton Center, to the 60th Anniversary Committee, and most of all, the Little Rock Nine and their families. We welcome you to this 60th Educational Forum for the City of Little Rock and the state of Arkansas. We thank you for being here, and we hope that something is said or done that will give you a better understanding when you leave here today. And let me digress for a minute and say that the NAACP was the organization that worked and spearheaded the Little Rock Nine. A terrible time in our history. I remind you, this was way before the March on Washington. This was way before the 1964 Civil Rights Act. This was way before the 1965 Voting Rights Act. These young people wanted to get an education. That's all they were aspiring to do. But our system at that time said you would not be able to go to school based upon a decision by the United States Supreme Court. However, Thurgood Marshall, who went on to be a Supreme Court Justice, Wiley Brandon Sr., one of the lawyers for the NAACP, along with the parents of the Little Rock Nine, went through some of the turbulent time as recorded in the history of America, that the court has said that they was entitled to go to school. Yet this government system in Arkansas said, no, you will not go to school at Central High School. Imagine those young people set out to get an education. That's all they wanted to get an education, and was denied that opportunity, and paid a tremendous debt that all of us in this room is enjoying today, that we owe them a great, great gratitude for their contribution, for what they went through to make it possible for us to be in this room today. We need to give them an applause. Now, I won't prolong the time. I have the task of introducing our speaker. Our speaker is no stranger. His dad was one of the lawyers, along with Thurgood Marshall, worked with the NAACP to make it possible. Our speaker is the sitting judge. He's not a retired judge. He's a sitting judge for the state of Arkansas, the city of Little Rock, is one of 3 juvenile judges that day to day have took on the task of being a surrogate for young people who has lost their way, and has sit in the courtroom and offered up many, many solutions to the problem that the young people face today. And that is none other than Judge Wiley Brown, Jr. He has his education degree. You know he had to have it in order to be a judge. But we need to talk about the many young people that has come before him in his court. And he has made a conscious decision and worked hard to provide them the right leadership so they can be productive citizens. Judge Wiley Brown, Jr. has served as a sitting judge since 1993 to the current term on a day-to-day task, doing the same thing for young people today that the Little Rock Nine was doing when they was trying to get an education, is to redirect young people and get them on the right course. And for that, we should be grateful to Judge Wiley Brown, Jr. We're running a tight schedule, so I am going to move out of the way and let him come up and begin to give us our opening statements and our purpose. Judge Wiley Brown, Jr. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Charles. It is my privilege today to participate in this 60th anniversary celebrating and/or commemorating and/or commiserating about the events surrounding the integration of Little Rock Central High School in 1957. Things such as the courage of the Little Rock Nine and that of their families is something that is worthy of celebration and praise. Things such as Governor Faubus's defiance of the rights of the Negro students under the United States Constitution, his defiance of federal court orders, and the racial hatred and mob violence directed at the Nine and others are things that need to be called out for the acts of cowardice which they were, and duly remembered for posterity, lest we go down that road again. And I'm afraid we're starting to creep down that road again, but maybe more on that before I finish. The theme of this 60th anniversary is reflections of progress, and fairly recent events certainly give us a lot to reflect upon at this time, and the issue of progress is up for mixed reviews. When the blockbuster decision of Brown versus Board of Education was issued in May 1957, a decision which ordered the end of state-sponsored segregated schools, the Supreme Court had this to say about the importance of education. And listen to this, reflect on this. Today, education is perhaps the most important function of state and local governments. Compulsory school attendance laws and the great expenditures for education both demonstrate our recognition of the importance of education to our democratic society. It is required in the performance of our most basic public responsibilities, even service in the armed forces. It is the very foundation of good citizenship. Today, it is a principal instrument in awakening the child to cultural values, in preparing him for later professional training, and in helping him to adjust normally to his environment. In these days, it is doubtful that any child may reasonably be expected to succeed in life if he is denied, or I'll say she, the opportunity of an education. Such an opportunity where the state is undertaken to provide it is a right which must be made available to all on equal terms. And I would submit to you today that those words have as much vitality today, perhaps even more than when they were uttered in 1954. Brown went on to talk about how segregated schools were harmful to black children. And again, let me read briefly from Brown. To separate them from others of similar age and qualifications solely because of their race generates a feeling of inferiority as to their status in the community that may affect their hearts and minds in a way unlikely to be undone. The impact is greater when it has the sanction of law, for the policy of separating the races is usually interpreted as denoting, this isn't supposed to be happening, it's denoting the inferiority of the Negro group. A sense of inferiority affects the motivation of a child to learn. Segregation with the sanction of law, therefore, has a tendency to retard the educational and mental development of Negro children and to deprive them I don't understand this. And to deprive them of some of the benefits they would have received in a racially integrated school system. I'm glad I'm done with that part. At the time of Brown, Thurgood Marshall had established himself. I can't see anymore. At the time of Brown, Thurgood Marshall had established himself as the chief legal strategist for the NAACP's Legal Defense Fund, and he believed that the only way to end racism in America was to have an integrated America, where people would just see each other as their fellow human being, as opposed to just some other person. He also wanted black people to have equal educational opportunities. And both of those objectives could only be accomplished if from the earliest ages children went to school with one another, sat next to each other, played with each other, and had meaningful interaction on a truly integrated basis. In the aftermath of the Brown decision, a group of black Arkansans associated with the NAACP, which included Miss Daisy Bates, Mr. L.C. Bates, Reverend J.C. Crenshaw, and my father, Wiley Branton Sr., then a young lawyer in Pine Bluff, decided to press the issue of integration in Little Rock. The Little Rock School District had come up with the plan of gradual integration, but the Arkansas NAACP, including the Little Rock branch, thought that the school district's plan did not go far enough or fast enough. It was deliberate speed, as in slow speed. Not liking the school district's plan, the Arkansas NAACP had my father to file a lawsuit in federal court upon behalf of the Negro plaintiffs seeking the immediate and full integration of the Little Rock School District. That lawsuit eventually became known as Cooper versus Aaron. It ended up in the United States Supreme Court in 1958. And after the lawsuit was filed in January 1956, my father did enlist the support of other lawyers associated with the NAACP. Prior to the critical and historical events of 1957, the case went to trial and the federal judge decided that the Little Rock plan was an acceptable plan. While the black plaintiffs were disappointed with the judge's ruling, the court did two things which paved the way for events to unfold in Little Rock the way they did in 1957. First, the court adopted the Little Rock plan and made it the order of the court. Therefore, if anyone sought to interfere with the Little Rock plan going forward, that person or persons would be violating an existing court order. And second, the federal court retained jurisdiction of the case so that if there were any problems with implementation of the plan, now a court order, the plaintiffs could seek immediate relief in court without having to start all over from scratch. And then came the nine walking onto the world stage. Miss Minnijean Brown Trickey, Miss Gloria Ray Mart, Miss Elizabeth Eckford, Mr. Ernest Green, Miss Thelma Mothershed Ware, Miss Melba Patillo Bills, Dr. Terrence Roberts, Miss Carlotta Walls Lanier, and Mr. Jefferson Thomas, who passed away in 2010. When Governor Faubus called out the National Guard to block the admission of the Little Rock Nine to Central High School, he was immediately in violation of a federal court order. Because of the earlier lawsuit filed by my father, the black plaintiffs were able to go right back to court and seek the enforcement authority of the federal government. It was the erupting crisis in the fall that got Mr. Marshall more directly involved in the case. And ultimately, even though President Eisenhower reportedly made private statements that he disagreed with Brown, he never publicly vilified the courts. He actually understood his role as president and how our system of government works. And ultimately, he made the decision to call out the federal troops to enforce the authority of the federal court and to enforce the constitutional rights of the nine to attend Little Rock Central. There were many significant things about what the Little Rock Nine did to contribute to the advancement of civil rights in America and the world. Because of their extraordinary courage, which was caught on photographs and moving film, the actions of the angry crowd towards the Little Rock Nine, towards the children, shamed America before the world. Unfortunately, the United States had to be shamed by many more acts of violence before the passage of significant civil rights legislation in the mid-1960s under the administration of Lyndon Baines Johnson. These new civil rights laws attempted to address voting rights, fair housing, public accommodations, and equal employment opportunities. And in fact, we have seen substantial progress in all of these areas for many minority groups. The Little Rock Nine and their families, Daisy and Elsie Bates, lawyers Wiley Branton Sr., Thurgood Marshall, and the many other lawyers who were on the team, and the community which supported, protected, and encouraged them. All of them played an important role in our struggle for civil and human rights. But all is not well. Reflect on this question and take Little Rock as an example, but this is an example that exists in other places as well. The Little Rock School District is overwhelmingly populated by black students in a city where we have a majority white population. If Brown tells us that segregation harms Negro students in 1957, are our students now being harmed in 19 2017 by a resegregated school system which has been caused in some measure by white flight, which began back with Brown, and governmental policies. Just something to think about. Is the trend towards charter schools and freedom of choice harming the educational opportunities of the children who are left in regular school? Something to think about. And what's up with the state's takeover of the Little Rock School District and the related disenfranchisement of citizens to elect their own school board and pick the superintendent of their choice? These are troubling issues. And what about racism, whether it be the upfront, in-your-face racism, or perhaps the more insidious form of racism known as implicit bias or unconscious bias? Up until the last presidential election, the overt racism had more or less gone into the closet and was expressed by only a fringe element. With recent events and statements of our highest of the high political leaders, overt racism has gained new respectability. Implicit or unconscious bias has never gone away. Sure, Barack Obama was elected president for 2 terms of the United States, which was something I had never expected to see in my lifetime. While there are many reasons why the last presidential election turned out the way it did, and many of those reasons are still being uncovered and deciphered, I submit that one of the factors that played into our most recent election was a racially motivated, either by overt or implicit bias, backlash against President Obama. We are at another major crossroads in our history with issues that challenge the very core of our democracy and freedom. We all need to remember the grace, courage, and determination displayed by the Little Rock Nine when they faced the political forces of the state and the angry mob back in 1957. There is much work that remains to be done in our ongoing quest for equal justice under the law. Thank you.
Why don't I give you a couple of seconds to reflect on those words. What a beautiful, beautiful presentation this morning. And I think we all kind of share those feelings that our judge expressed so well. Thank you, Judge Brantley. My name is Janice F. Kearney, and I'm not as tall as you are. My name is Janice F. Kearney, and I will be the moderator for this morning's first panel. And I would like to, first of all, thank the City of Little Rock, and specifically Bruce Moore, who I had never worked with up close until I became a part of the committee, and I thank Del Charles for that. I am so impressed with his leadership style and his ability to pull things together in spite of so many different personalities that he had to work with. And I think the most important glue to that whole thing was knowing that we were celebrating the Little Rock Nine, and he had the whole city behind him in that, and I just give him so much credit for his ability to do that. We have some amazing panelists this morning who will be talking about where we were before 1957. Most of them do not need any introductions. I'll give you a very brief introduction on the two that have not spoken this morning. But let me open up and just say that our panel is based on the fact that nothing in our world happens in a vacuum. Arkansas, America, the world didn't suddenly wake up in September 1957 and find an imperfect world. It was there already. There was injustice, there was inhumanity, uncivil rights, unnecessary poverty, discrimination, inequities in everything from schools to hospitals to government jobs. All of this happened before September 1957, before those 9 brave children went into Central High School. So I do think that it's important for those of us who know from common logic that every action is based on another action or inaction, that we have to tell the whole truth. As the judge mentioned, we have a responsibility to, and I think this will be a good start. So that's what we'll spend the next 45 minutes discussing. And I'm going to start out with just one question for Ms. Triopia Green Washington, she's not just Ernie Green's big sister. She has a long resume of important work that she's done over the years in education and history, and I think those are 2 extremely important areas for us to be involved in. So I'm going to open it up to Ms. Triopia, and I'm going to ask her to talk about, what do you think was one of the most important precursors to the 1957 crisis? If you had had a crystal ball, a week, a month, a year before the 9 children went into Central High, what would you have seen to make you know that Little Rock was headed to this crescendo that we call the 1957 crisis at Central High?
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be home again and to participate in this really, really important event. I'm going to go back a few decades. In the 40s, our mother, and I'm a sister of Ernest Green, our mother and our aunt were both teachers at Dunbar High School. That was the colored high school and my alma mater. They were a part of a group of teachers who in the 40s filed a lawsuit against the Little Rock School Board for equal pay for black teachers. At that time, black teachers were paid far less than white teachers with the same credentials. As a part of that lawsuit, the NAACP, and I must mention my brother reminded me this morning that our mother was a lifelong member of the NAACP, and at that time dutifully paid the $5 a year membership. The NAACP supported the Little Rock school teachers in their lawsuit by sending their legal counsel, Thurgood Marshall, to represent the teachers. Well, my part of that, I was about 4 years old, and I remember the conversations that my mother and aunt had about this lawsuit. At one of Thurgood Marshall's visits, our family was asked to host him. Why? Because none of the hotels by law would accommodate colored guests. Well, again, I mentioned I was 4, and at 4, you know, pardon me, know a little something, but not a lot. I remember in the conversation, my mother said that Thurgood Marshall would fly into Little Rock. Well, during that time, people traveled by trains for the most part. And air travel, there were propeller planes, jet planes had not been invented yet. And I recall standing on my step stool at our back window, waiting for the plane to land in our backyard. Well, when the doorbell rang and my mother announced that Attorney Marshall was here, I was absolutely appalled that he would deny me the opportunity to see his plane land. In fact, I told his son years later that I don't think I ever forgave your father for disappointing me. But that lawsuit was won by the Little Rock school teachers, and that group of teachers collected enough money that year to pay the salary of the plaintiff, Sue Cowan Williams, for whom the library is named here in Little Rock. That was something that I will never forget. The film last night also reminded me of something else. If those of you who saw it recall that it ended with the actor who played Thurgood Marshall at the White Water Fountain. When I was growing up, Pfeiffer Department Store on 6th and Main had 2 water fountains in the basement. One was marked colored, the other marked white. And I was learning to read, and I asked my mother which one I should drink from. And she said, whichever one you wish. I often thought of what someone in the last administration said, when they go low, you go high. And that's exactly what was practiced in my growing up. One other vignette that occurred to me, and this because I think I'm staying at the newly refurbished Holiday Inn across from MacArthur Park. When my brothers and I were very young, one Sunday, our mother and father took us to the park to hear the band concert. As we approached the curb, we were met by a policeman who said, "We don't allow colored to listen." My mother said, "We'll find something else to do this afternoon." I thought about what Maya Angelou said once, and that is, I don't remember what you said. I don't remember what you did, but I'll never forget how you made me feel. And as I passed by MacArthur Park yesterday, I remembered that I had never gone past there since then until yesterday. So again, it's growing up during that time. I like to refer to it as in spite of, because in spite of the laws that prohibited us from doing things, we were always supported by our families, our community, our church, to think that we could always excel in whatever we wanted to do if we worked hard enough.
Thank you, Triopia. And she will be talking later about one of the projects that I think has really been a big part of your life. She'll talk about that a little later. I am going to ask Griff Stockley to come up and answer that same question about what things were going on. Griff is a local author and historian, and he has devoted his life to writing about and researching civil rights history, and he's done many, many books on the subject.
Use this. Thank you very much for this introduction and inviting me to participate on this panel. Obviously, it is a very moving experience for all of us. As I understand it, my task is to talk briefly about the Central High crisis in terms of what happened before 1957. There are a number of ways to do this, and obviously I'm only going to be able to touch on part of it. But I'm going to begin by reading a sentence from an editorial in the Arkansas State Press on March 20th, 1959, by L.C. Bates about the fire at the Arkansas Negro Boys Industrial School outside of Little Rock that burned to death 21 boys locked inside a dormitory. Mr. Bates wrote, and I'm quoting here, "We wonder if the white man in the South who has set the pattern for the Negro to live by can find any consolation for the irreparable damage that his system has caused." An accompanying headline read, "Is segregation worth this?" And Mr. Bates was acknowledging that he had ordered the print and negative of one of the victims to be destroyed. The remains were, quote, "too gruesome to be filed in the morgue," unquote. In other words, what conceivable benefit could result from a system of white supremacy that resulted in such horrible deaths for these 21 adolescent children, some of whom had no place to live, and some who were merely guilty of petty crimes such as stealing a bicycle? As we today again honor the courage of the Little Rock Nine and all those who assisted them, surely it is our obligation to continue to explore how much of our racial history has been covered up in Arkansas or misrepresented. Let me give you an example or two of what I'm talking about. As the pressure on the Little Rock white power structure to implement a desegregation plan mounted in 1956, Margaret Ross Smith, editor of the Pulaski County Historical Review, and who contributed a history column for the Arkansas Gazette, wrote a lengthy article titled, quote, "Have we neglected Negro history?" and concluded that if Negroes feel that the writing of their history has not been assumed satisfactorily by the white people, then qualified Negroes should undertake the task. Not to pick on Ms. Smith excessively, but she surely knew that the deck was stacked in Arkansas and the South. In a book titled Land of Opportunity, One Family's Quest for the American Dream in the Age of Crack by reporter William Adler, Dr. Calvin Smith, who I believe was the first African American hired as a professor at Arkansas State in Jonesboro, was interviewed for background material about growing up in Marianna in the heart of the Arkansas Delta, and incidentally my hometown. A historian, Dr. Smith, told author William Adler that, and I'm quoting, "the books that we got from Futrell," and let me interject here, that's where I went to high school, where I graduated, had nothing on Black history. To read them was to reinforce your non-existence. This omission was hardly an oversight. In his 2005 book, The Southern Past, A Clash of Race and Memory, national historian W. Fitzhugh Brundage wrote, quote, "The North Carolina and Arkansas History Commissions made their first forays into marking and preserving historic shrines, as they were charged to do by their charters. They inevitably focused on sites hallowed by whites. Black newspapers, institutional records, and private correspondence went uncollected. The void in the collections of the South impeded opportunities to understand the Southern racial order from any perspective other than its architects. Moreover, it twisted and constrained all subsequent historical research on African Americans in the region, effectively erasing Black historical agency." Okay, I'm going to skip that part to get the scan here. In my introduction to Black Boys Burning, the 1959 fire at the Arkansas Negro Boys Industrial School, published this summer by the University Press of Mississippi, I wrote in the introduction, "As L.C. and his wife Daisy Bates knew only too well, white supremacy had been carried out over time by slavery, bad science, murder, rape, terrorism, lynching, massacres, mass incarceration, peonage, disfranchisement, racial cleansing, arson, racial covenants, predatory lending, loan discrimination, redlining, blockbusting, segregation, intimidation, humiliation, discrimination, denial of free speech, termination from employment, a truly massive theft of financial resources for services lawfully intended for black citizens, quarantine rather than effective treatment of black persons diagnosed with tuberculosis, paternalism in a civil and criminal justice system that routinely denied African Americans due process and equal protection of the law. As an integral part of impediments to African American rights, the official and unofficial writing of the South's racial past sometimes resemble propaganda rather than history in order to justify the action of white Southerners. Notwithstanding the carnage and devastation caused by the Civil War, accounts of the South's struggle and its defeat over time have often been transformed into an occasion for nostalgia, reenactments, and legends, rather than attempts to come to terms with its actual history. My reason for listing all these ways that white supremacy has been implemented in Arkansas is to suggest the obvious, that the lead up to the constitutional crisis in 1957 at Central High was not just about inequality in education in a poor southern state, but grew out of Arkansas's racial history, beginning with slavery and coming forward. As another way of thinking about our racial history before 1957, let me review some unnerving parallels. I'm going to read an abbreviated entry from the Arkansas slave narratives, which are the interviews of former slaves by individuals employed by the Works Progress Administration during the Great Depression. You can go online and read the Arkansas interviews. For far too long, the interviews have been ignored by Arkansas historians. This has begun to change, fortunately. The following is from an interview of Peter Brown, age 86, who was born outside of Pine Bluff. In a classic understatement, Mr. Brown said, "My remembrance of slavery is not at all favorable. I heard the master and overseers whooping the slaves before day. They had stakes fixed in the ground and tied them down on their stomachs stretched out, and they beat them with a bullwhip. They would break their blisters on them with white oak paddles that had holes in it so that it would suck. I heard that going on when I was a child, morning after morning," unquote. And let's fast forward to what was occurring at the Arkansas Negro Boys Industrial School roughly a century later. This is from an interview in 2009 with a man who remembered his experiences at the Negro Boys Industrial School in 1959. I need to add that Frank Lawrence, whose brother Lindsay died in the fire, and I did this telephone interview together. But Mr. Nash said, and I'm quoting here, quote, "I'd gotten about 5 or 6 whippings. He said boys were whipped if you wet the bed, if you didn't pick enough cotton, if you got to fighting, if you tried to run off. He said he, quote, was held down by other inmates and hit with a big old strap as wide as your hand. Give you 10 or 15 licks. Had boys hold you down, tore your butt up," unquote. An entire century had passed and black people, this time children, were still being whipped. Now this week in 2017, we read in the paper about how, and I quote Senator Stephanie Flowers from Pine Bluff, who said about the state's juvenile jails, "We built a school-to-prison pipeline." Until we acknowledge and began to analyze the aggregate consequences of our implementation of white supremacy in all its historical and psychological manifestations, we don't stand much chance of understanding and internalizing its irreparable damage. As it so happens, the history of the Arkansas Negro Boys Industrial School between 1923 and 1968, when a federal judge finally signed an order after delay ending segregation in the boys' so-called industrial schools, thanks to John Walker's dogged litigation, is a textbook example of how difficult these issues are. Now that the segregation has ended, have we solved the issues of white supremacy? How easy it is to ignore what goes on outside of Little Rock. We would deceive ourselves by thinking, that we can understand our racial history in Arkansas through a single pane of glass, for example, education. The shocking disparities between black and white institutions in Arkansas were a consequence of the commitment of the white power structure to maintain white supremacy for as long as politically possible. In other words, the conditions at Wrightsville and other black institutions and the attitudes of the white power structure toward them were a product of, quote, structural racism, which scholars have defined as the normalization of an array of dynamics, historical, cultural, institutional, and interpersonal, that routinely advantages whites while producing cumulative and adverse chronic outcomes for people of color. Let me conclude by saying structural racism encompasses the entire system of white supremacy, diffused and infused in all aspects of society, including our history, culture, politics, and economics. Thank you.
Thank you, Griff, very much. A lot of good history there. I am going to ask the judge to change up a little bit. I have a pet peeve, and that one is that our children, there's like a list of maybe 10 history subjects that they're given to talk about usually, or if they're asked to write about it. There's not a lot that they know as people who really made a difference before 1957, but there are loads and loads of people that have. And I would love for you to come up here and talk about some people who made a difference, and probably things could have been even worse than they were had those people not done that. So would you do that for us?
So I grew up in the segregated South in Pine Bluff. All of Arkansas was, and all of the South was. But we always had people that we looked up to. Certainly in my own family, there was my family that we were an educated family. Folks had gone to college and whatnot. We had our own businesses. So we had some role models within our family. So I guess I never actually had to look beyond my family for some role models. That was a good thing for my development. But if you look at some of the, I want to say something about some of the lawyers, and not just in Arkansas, because my dad was typical of many lawyers across the South. If you were a black lawyer in those days, you were automatically, by definition, a civil rights lawyer. One of the things Justice Marshall would say as he went from place to place is he'd say, you know, I go into these communities and I do what I do, and then I get on a car or a train and I leave town and I leave the local lawyer there. They kind of showed that last night if you saw that movie, Marshall, but that was the reality. So people like my dad, and you could name one of the things that my dad always did was to go through a litany of the lawyers who cooperated with the NAACP around the nation, who were willing to take on these difficult cases. Oftentimes they didn't pay any money. Oftentimes, they put themselves at great risk, yet they were trying to give people legal representation in times when legal representation was hard to come by. And also, just to tie, and I'm going off subject, but I really do want to say that we do really need to recognize the work of the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and the Legal Defense Fund. And this is why. The NAACP was founded around, correct me, Mr. President, around 1919, and they began to assault racial injustice in America, and they quickly learned they needed to do it in a legal way. Eventually, they created a legal arm, the Legal Defense and Education Fund, and later on, they really became separate entities. But they had a strategy of attacking racism and oppression around the nation. So the Little Rock case is kind of, the Brown versus Board of Education was a NAACP effort. Some of the cases attacking higher education before that, where they attacked the separate but equal doctrine and were able to get blacks into some professional schools, medical school or law school or whatnot, worked. But Brown was the blockbuster case. But it was a strategy. One of the things about Little Rock is they didn't think anything was going to happen in Little Rock. As compared to the rest of the South, they knew something might jump out in Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, but Arkansas was considered a fairly moderate place on race relations. So things unexpectedly went off the track in the fall of 57, much to their surprise. So we did not, Little Rock really wasn't on the strategy board of the National NAACP office. It really started out as a purely local effort with the local NAACP, my father as an attorney, local black plaintiffs that they found. They had no idea it was going to morph into the thing that it morphed into in the fall of 1957. But I will just say thank God for the NAACP and the LDF.
Thank you, Judge. My final question to each of you. We can't really go back and change anything that's happened in history. We've had to struggle through it. We'll continue to struggle through it. If you could talk to me about one thing that we as Americans, as Arkansans, as Southerners, could have done so that there would not be a celebration of the Little Rock Nine today, that we could have prevented the pain, the struggles that we've gone through. America is supposed to be, or we are, one of the greatest countries in the world. What is it that we could have done to preclude this? And I want to start with Griff Stockley.
Obviously,
can you turn it up?
obviously, as a white person from Marianna, Arkansas, we could have done so much more than we did. We know that our history, and this is what obviously I'm interested in now, we know that so much of our history has been is simply wrong. And I can tell you some things that are going on now that finally we are beginning to change. We know, for example, and I was going to say this if I'd had more time, is that we no longer write that what happened in Elaine and the surrounding area in Phillips County in 1919 was an attempted, quote, insurrection by blacks, but was a massacre by whites whose dimensions are still being investigated. We know and write, for example, about, for example, that in 1949 at the Arkansas Social Work Conference, it was revealed that Arkansas white school boards, quote, diverted $4,250,000 in 1948 that was intended for black schools. We know that thanks to the first black PhD at the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville, Dr. Gordon Morgan, who did a master's thesis at the Negro Boys Industrial School in 1956, that the conditions at the so-called school were horrific, that boys, and I'm quoting here, besides brutal whippings, many boys go for days with only rags for clothes. More than half of them wear neither socks nor underwear during the winter of 1955, 1956, when this study was in progress. I mean, I could go on with his criticisms of the Negro Boys Industrial School, but this was a prison work farm for black adolescents, not an institution to train or rehabilitate children. Let me just conclude what I'm saying by noting that we have begun to change this through a number of ways, and this is something that I think we can begin to be proud of. There are a number of, state institutions which now have begun to try to tell the truth about our Arkansas racial history. And of course, what we should have done was never to have commit the sort of things I'm talking about. But what we can do is work together to tell our true history about what we did do. And this is something that, I mean, I would not be able to name. I would probably leave some out. But for example, the Butler Center for Arkansas Studies, we know that at other institutions, Arkansas Studies Institute, we are doing research to tell the truth about the Elaine Race Massacre. There's so much more that we can do and will be doing, and I hope as students in the audience, you will realize that you will have an opportunity to be a part of rewriting our history, which in fact so much of it was propaganda to justify our behavior. I'll just close there. Thank you very much. I just want to let people know that there are books that are going to be on sale. Autographed is an autographed books that at 1 o'clock in the Central High Library by authors who have been writing what some of us I think will be a true history, or at least a more complete history of Arkansas race relations at 1 o'clock in the Central Library. Thank you.
Does he need to repeat the script? Would you please repeat?
Okay. At 1 o'clock this afternoon at the Central High Library, there will be a book signing by authors, including myself, one about the fire at the Arkansas Negro Boys Industrial School. But there are several other authors who have written, I think, some really excellent works which go back and get our racial history that we never recorded or that we recorded wrongly, and hopefully you'll have an opportunity to at least look at some of the books and actually maybe buy some. So thank you.
Thank you.
In response to the question, what perhaps could have been done, that provokes a lot of thought. And one of the things I thought about, I mentioned earlier that I was a student at Dunbar High School, and our football team, the Bearcats, were allowed to use Central's football field on Fridays. And through the years that I was at Dunbar, we would walk by Central, going to the football field, and looking at that building and realizing that that building was 3 times the size of our high school, you sort of figured that there were 3 times as much things going on as in our high school. And then I thought about something else that preceded that time. I mentioned earlier something about my mother being a teacher and teachers at Dunbar, but teachers at that time, black teachers, although they were by law to receive graduate degrees, were not allowed to go to colleges, to Southern colleges. So the state paid for teachers to go away in the summer for 6 weeks to earn graduate degrees at the University of Wisconsin, the University of Iowa, the University of New York, and so forth. So all that to me says that I guess there's a time and a place for everything. And I think what occurred in '57 was the accumulation of all those things that had occurred over the years, whether it was the teachers being sent away in the South, our passing by to play on the football field only on Fridays, that by '57, it's kind of like a cauldron in which the liquid is bubbling up. By '57, it was boiling over. So that was the time for action to be taken, and thank goodness for lawyers like Thurgood Marshall, Wiley Branton Sr., and others who came to the rescue and saw to it that Central High, and of course that meant that other schools eventually in Arkansas would finally be allowed to accept everybody as it should have been all along.
I love my country. It's a great country, but my love and my patriotism for my country does not make me blind to its many, many faults. America was founded on 2 original sins. The first sin was the taking of this land from an indigenous people. The second sin was slavery. Now, we're not giving the country back, and don't put me on the boat and send me back to Africa. I'm here. But this creates a duty in America to seek redemption, forgiveness, and atonement. That's what makes America have a special obligation. We have things to pay for. That's why I think we do have a special duty, and it's not because we're so wonderful and that we're blessed from above. It's because we have some things that we need to pay back. We need to make some things right. And the only way we can do that is to provide moral leadership in the world, moral leadership right here at home. And before I get political, let me shut up and sit down.
Would you all please put your hands together for this amazing panel? I am going to need to ask Mr. Terrence Cox if we have time for questions. 2 questions? Okay, all right. Anyone yes. Good morning. Let me give her one of the microphones. Good morning.
Thank you. My name is Dr. Carolyn, and I'm here from Oakland, California. And I travel with a group called Sojourn to the Past, and we work with Minnijean Brown Tricky, educating students about civil rights and social justice. And we do a class on the Little Rock 9, which is 4 hours. And each time I hear that Arkansas was a moderate state and you didn't think it was going to happen here, I was born in Arizona. My parents are from Fordyce. I don't understand what a moderate southern state is and why you thought it would not happen here.
It's a relative concept. Relative to Alabama. It's just a relative concept, relative to Alabama, relative to Mississippi, relative to Georgia. Certainly terrible things have happened in Arkansas, but I think in Arkansas we didn't consider it like the deep South. We're getting kind of to the Midwest. That's all, but it's a matter of relativity.
Good answer. Anyone else? One more question. Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your question.
Hello, my name is Nora Boozy-Hay, and I want to say thank you so much for coming. I'm a recent graduate of the Clinton School of Public Service and now a doctorate in education candidate at UALR. My question is, it is sad to say that we are currently, as young adults, living similar paths as the days of segregation back in the 50s and 60s. What is a word of advice that you would give for me being a minority and a Muslim in America, or any other minorities currently? What word of advice would you give us to keep pushing and to keep achieving our goals?
Thank you. Thank you for your question.
A couple words: never give up. You will win.
Vote, get your friends to vote. I mean, we're in the jam to win because folks didn't turn out and vote the way they should be voting.
I mean, I would think that all of us need to relearn our history and question what we have been taught in the past and realize that there are better days ahead.
Thank you. Thank you all for your questions. I'm going to close by just saying that I also am the founding CEO of something called the Celebrate Maya Project. We celebrate Maya Angelou's life and her contributions here in Arkansas. And this weekend we brought in a wonderful group of students from the Marvel Elaine School District. And they have been here, and they saw Ms. Carlotta Walls yesterday, and hopefully they'll get a chance to see some of you, and I want them to stand up and introduce yourselves all together, not each other. We had a wonderful day yesterday, and we look forward to the rest of this day. This has been wonderful. Thank you all. I've learned so much. Thank you. One more.
I would not be able to go back to Bowie State University in Maryland if I didn't do this. So bear with me for 2 minutes. At Bowie State University, we have been privileged to work on a curriculum to accompany the film Daisy Bates, First Lady of Little Rock, produced by Sharon LaCruz. A group at Bowie College of Education has been working on this for the past 3 or 4 years. It has just been completed, and I was allowed to introduce it to you, the first audience, to hear about this, and I will have flyers with the abstract on the table in the back. There are still copyright issues being developed because it will be online along with the film, Daisy Bates, First Lady of Little Rock. In about another month, please Google the film title, and you will be able to acquire the curriculum and the film. So we are extremely pleased to honor Daisy Bates by completing this curriculum. Thank you.
not going in the order that it says here. Okay. Mine, and I'm just going to call you. But you can sit and answer. That's the one thing I want to make clear. That's why we have mine.
I don't want to sit.
Okay. You can. Okay. I'm very short. Good morning. I'm so pleased that you are all here with us today. And as a retired professor of history, I am honored to be able to introduce to you the panel members that are going to speak to you. I am not going in the order that was printed on this program because, in my mind, it works better another way. And you know, teachers are that way. They make up their own minds. So, I consider the theme of this particular panel something like triumph over adversity. Each of the panelists experienced segregated schools, education. Some were directly involved in the crisis year. Others were victims of the lost year when all Little Rock high schools were closed for an entire academic year, and some experienced all three. Despite being youth, now remember, teenagers, like some of you in the audience, they were teenagers during the Little Rock's chaotic events, and all of these guests persevered and succeeded. They lived productive lives, or are still living productive lives. They've had remarkable careers, and they have given service with distinction. So they obviously all have long resumes. And so for that reason, what I'm going to do is shorten their resume so that they have more time to speak. And because there are five speakers up here, we're going to have to move it along pretty quickly. Lottie Shackleford has made history throughout her 40 years in politics. She was appointed to the Little Rock City Board in the 70s. She was elected the first female mayor of Little Rock in the 80s, and she has served long with the National Democratic Party. Here, she had the longest tenure, 20 years, as vice chair of the DNC, where she worked internationally in political forums all over Africa, Eastern Europe, and in Taiwan. She is currently honored as vice chair emeritus of the party and is chair of the DNC Women's Caucus. So, Ms. Shackleford, she wants to speak here. They have microphones that they can use if they prefer to sit. So if you would like to do it your way, come ahead.
Good morning. And thank you, Ms. Gordy. She has been a wonderful moderator, facilitator, and all in the sense of keeping us informed and challenging us as to how we should think. Realizing that time is not always our friend, and my understanding is we're already over time, so I'm going to dispense of some of the acknowledgments I would have wanted to do. And I'd like to sort of share my own personal feeling about how I fit into what we're now commemorating as the 60th anniversary of the Little Rock 9, or the desegregation of Central High School. I was a senior in high school for the 57-58 school year. I am a native of Little Rock, Arkansas, and had the opportunity of attending what was then Gibbs School, that was on the same property as Dunbar High School. That building is now torn down and the Gibbs School is about a block away. But at that time, Gibbs Elementary School shared the cafeteria with Dunbar High School. So those students who went to Gibbs, you also thought you were going to Dunbar, which was the black high school at the time, because we saw everything that was going on. We ate in that cafeteria. We saw the band practice. We saw the football teams practice. We had the opportunity to go into their gym. So we just felt we were a part of that school. Fast forward, I started there in 2nd grade, and Ernie Green and I were classmates from that point until he went to Central during our senior year. When the Brown decision came down, a lot of planning was being done, a lot of chatter was being held, and there were many scenarios as to how Little Rock School District was going to be desegregated or integrated. There was a plan that it would start with the elementary schools, and then it was junior high schools. Then finally, the plan came about that it would be the high school. I say this because there were many of us at that time who were told, some 250, 300 kids when we were about 10th grade, that this was going to happen in the Little Rock School District, and black students were going to be able to go to Central High School. By the time it became apparent that that was going to happen, some of the students who had been talked with earlier and whose parents had said, yes, you may be able to go, they were now going to be seniors. And I think that's in part one of the reasons why there was only one senior who actually went. I, for one, not really knowing what I know today, because after all, I was a 15 or 16-year-old student. I felt my senior year, I had looked forward to that senior year all my life. And high school at that time was such a momentous occasion in the black community. And when you finished high school, I mean, people gave you gifts like they give at weddings nowadays. You would get so many gifts just for that accomplishment, which kids don't even think about anymore, of finishing high school. So high school in the black community, finishing high school in the black community was truly important. And so you build up to that year after year after year. In the Little Rock School District after the 54 decision, Horace Mann High School was built. And the first students to graduate were students of the 1956 school year. That meant those of us in the 10th grade, we then saw that change from having been in this massive school, Dunbar, that was both junior high and senior high. Now we're going over to a new school that we went with ambivalence, because this was a school with the open courtyard. Every time you stepped out of a classroom door, you stepped out into the elements of the weather, whether it was cold, raining, hot. And this was a whole new concept for us. So having had that kind of experience from starting at Dunbar in 7th grade, thinking I'm going to graduate there, thinking I'm going to walk down the aisles of Robinson Auditorium, because that's where the graduations for Dunbar were being held. Now fast forward, it's our senior year, and we're in Horace Mann. Horace Mann has no auditorium and just a gymnasium. So the issue then, well, where will we march to graduate from? And that question was there because that year, once the Little Rock Nine finally entered school, all kinds of edicts started to come out from the Little Rock School District. You can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do that. One thing was that all school activities would have to be held on school premises. Well, here, the high school I'm now going to doesn't have an auditorium. So where will we get our diploma? But our teachers and the community were very creative. And it was at a time when you didn't have news 24/7. The TVs actually went off and everybody heard the Star Spangled Banner at 12 o'clock midnight. And TVs didn't come on again until early morning. And you didn't have people opinionating about what will or what won't happen. We got the news 3 times a day, and you rushed home at the end of the school day to find out what happened at Central High. We knew that change was occurring, but because if you just think about that times where everybody was so protective of youngsters, then they were trying to protect us and make certain that our school year still had all of the pumping circumstances that we had lived all our lives for. And so my experience as a senior that year was still being able to wonder about what was going on at Central, rushing in the afternoon to watch the news. We had friendships, particularly with Ernie, because we were part of a small group and we had communicated all the while. So we would find out from them some of the things that were going on. And then we tried to be supportive as much as possible in the sense of inviting the students of the Little Rock Nine to our activities at Horace Mann. And we ended up having a good year. A lot of new things happened, but that was sort of the tone that the city was undergoing at that time. We knew incidents of people losing jobs and all, but we didn't understand. As seniors in high school, I did not understand the impact that was going on until during the end of the school year, and we went to a journalism workshop in Jefferson City, Missouri, and it was from students from high schools across the South. And when we stood up and introduced ourselves and said we were from Little Rock, Arkansas, all of the press and the media came, and they were asking questions about how did you get out, or where, you know, you have on shoes, or, I mean, it was those kinds of things that then started us to understand the impact of what was going on. Bearing in mind that was a mild understanding then. Fast forward 60 years, we have a much deeper understanding and a much deeper appreciation for all of the things that the Little Rock Nine endured and persevered. And we owe them a debt of gratitude because they stuck it out. And we are always grateful. Thank you.
We're going to introduce one of the Little Rock Nine, Gloria Ray Mart, because she was a victim or a survivor of the crisis year, and she also was a victim of the lost year. So she got a double whammy there, as did Mr. Yatta, who we'll learn about later. As a member of the Little Rock Nine, you know that she did that, and I'm going to let her tell you what she did during the lost year. But after high school, she attended Illinois Institute of Technology, earning a BS in chemistry and mathematics. Good for you. She worked briefly as a public school teacher and a research assistant at the University of Chicago Research Medical Center. In 1966, she married Christer Karl Mart, and in 1970, she joined IBM, International Business Machines, for you young people who don't know what that is, machines, in Stockholm, Sweden. She graduated, you'll love this pronunciation, Kungliga Patent Registreringsverket, as a patent attorney, and worked for IBM patent operations until 1981, and then she founded and edited Computers and Industry, an international journal, and then she worked again in the Netherlands for Philips Telecommunications and Lighting, and she presently lives in Amsterdam. Is that correct? Stockholm. She's back to Stockholm. All right. As a member of the Little Rock Nine, she and all the others and Mrs. Bates were awarded the Springhorn Medal, which is the most prestigious award that the NAACP receives. And in 1999, President Bill Clinton awarded all of the Little Rock Nine. Now, Mr. Branton, I would like to say I cannot get through with this one without crying. I do it every time I give a tour, so feel just right. In 1999, Bill Clinton awarded all of the Little Rock Nine the Congressional Gold Medal, which is the highest civilian award that one can receive. And not today because you don't have time, but come back to the Clinton Center and walk down this floor north, and on the left, there's a complete exhibit about the Little Rock Nine and a replica of that congressional medal. When I give a tour, I do this every time. All right, so much for that. All right, so what we want to hear from is, who we want to hear from is Gloria Ray Karl Mart, and I want her to tell us about her experiences in the lost year, in the crisis year, and whatever else she would like to say.
Thank you. I'm going to try and tell you my story sitting. This will be the first time I've done that in front of a large audience. I usually stand or stand and cry, or sit behind a big table and cry. Yeah, I'm Gloria, and I'm really honored to be here before you to speak to you about the year 1957-58. And what happened to me also in the lost year. I began that year, 1957, full of excitement in Dunbar Junior High School. Maybe I will stand up, it's easier. I was in Dunbar Junior High School in the spring of 1957, and that's when the piece of paper was passed around in the room where Carlotta and I sat, and it said, who wants to go to Little Rock Central High School in the fall? If you want to go, put your name, sign the paper. And the paper was passed around. And when it came to me, I wrote my name and passed it on. And Carlotta apparently wrote her name too. And that was so exciting. It was like all the opportunities that had been hidden from us, really, because I'd never been in Central High School, but I heard that it was really a great school, and I knew that the students from that school had sometimes earned scholarships and done great things. So that was the spring of '57, and that joy, it lasted all through the summer. And in August, Carlotta came by and said, Gloria, you signed the paper to go to Central. Shall we go up and register together? Because when you change from junior high school to a different school, then you had to register at the new school. And so we went up to Central High School one August day. I drove, actually had a driver's license and drove at the tender age of 14. But that's the way it was in the South. My dad took my mother's driver's license and changed a few things, and I renewed that, and I had a... So we drove a car up to Central High School, got out, and went up there to the building. And there are a lot of steps, a long way from the street, actually. I remember that. And we went up there. It was opened the door, saw the room where it said register, and went in and registered at the new school. The ladies in the office there, they looked a bit surprised to see us. But they didn't know us, so I didn't really notice any more than it was a natural reaction for the situation. We signed ourselves in, and then we went off and did something. I don't really remember what we did after that. But that was, another step in getting into the forbidden object. It was finally ours. And so it kind of surprised me, the newspaper articles, they were saying, oh, there really are blacks that intend to go to Little Rock Central High School. And the commotion that sort of was in the media and in the newspapers afterwards. But I thought, well, just like the previous speaker said about Arkansas in 1957, I thought that, Arkansas is not like Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. We're different here, and especially Little Rock, because we could already, in 1957, sit wherever we wanted to on a bus. And so I thought, well, it's not, there might be some opposition, but I wasn't really worried about it. It wasn't really any more dangerous than going downtown. You just went about your own business. So when it was decided that we would all go together and walk up to the school together, that surprised me, but okay, I still had this dream. And I walked up to that school with this dream, and sure enough, there were soldiers standing there. Soldiers to stop children from going to school. And that was like the real awakening. That's when 57 took on a different a meaning in my life. Actually, it's when I kind of grew up. I started to notice the difference between what you saw in the movies and what really was happening around me. And I started to see myself as really someone other than Mr. Ray's daughter. I was someone who had a right, and I was someone who had a dream. And for me, that became a problem, because in front of me are these men saying, you cannot take a step forward. Some white girls would come up, and they would move aside and let them walk past. And when I tried to follow them, they closed ranks again, shoulder to shoulder. So I became very serious. I realized, well, Gloria Ray is gone. There's a principal standing here. And what kind of future rests for me now when a white girl can just walk past and get my dream, but I can't. I'm not allowed to. So that framed the rest of 1957 for me. It was to do everything in my power to make it possible for me to reach my dream, and for all others like me with the same rights to also be able to reach their dream. It was something that needed to be done, that hadn't been done, and something that, well, with a little maturity and faith, I could perhaps make a contribution towards getting done. And something without which, for my young life, there would be no future. I could not honestly imagine living conscious of the fact that I was considered a lesser person than the next person just because of the way I looked. After that came 3 long weeks of just waiting for permission or the opportunity to go to school. totally new for me. Every year, first day of school, you went to school, you saw all the new kids and whatnot. But no, I met some new kids, some wonderful kids that are still in my life. And that's the members of the 9 that I didn't know. I didn't know Minnijean before. I didn't know Terrence before. I said, who else didn't I know before? And I didn't know Elizabeth Egbert. Thelma I knew because she lived not too far away. And I have this brother who knew all the pretty girls, and Thelma had some really pretty sisters. And Ernie lived around the corner, and Jefferson lived around the corner too. So I met some old friends, and I met a few new friends every day practically for 21 days, waiting for permission to go to school. Okay, that's the easy part. Well, not really easy, but that was the part where not much action happened, 1957. 25th of September, then we hit actually a little bit before the 25th. Was it the 23rd? That we went to school for about 2 hours. We actually got into the school, only to discover once in there was this huge mob outside the school. I became aware of it when it was my study period, according to the schedule. And the windows were open, so the loud sound of what was outside it filled the room. And perhaps out of self-preservation, I don't know what, but I wanted to know what was happening out there. So I pretended my pencil needed to be sharpened, and I went to the pencil sharpeners at the window. And I saw them. I saw the mob out there. I saw the faces. I heard what they had to say. I'd never seen a sight like that. It's a view that stays with me. I see it now. I didn't know you could make your face look so tortured. I didn't know that you could have I'd never seen hate like that. And it was live, right out there, right out through that window. And I knew it was aimed at me and my friends at school. So that was a real happening, I can tell you for one thing. And then someone came to the door, and you know the rest of the story. They managed to get us out of the school. I experienced the exit as one horrendous thing too, which is also lives with me to this day. When I go around to schools in Sweden and tell my story, this is the one where they're totally silent. Everyone is okay. But the police officer came and to take me from the principal's office down to a car that was supposed to get us out of the school. They were going to smuggle us out. And they took us down to one of the basement floors of the school, and there was this car there. And the police officer told me to get into the back seat of the car and to lay on the floor, and under no circumstances to lift my head. I guess this must be different for each of the 9 of us, because as I recall, I was the only one in my car, or that car. And he said, you lay down there, and under no circumstances are you to raise your head. And then that car started its trajectory up from the basement floors of the school. And you know, like in parking garages, that exit is a spiral thing. At the very bottom, where I got into the car, it was very quiet. You couldn't hear the noise from outside. But as that car went around that spiral up towards the surface and the exit onto the grounds, the noise of the mob got louder and louder and louder, and then it got really, 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 really loud. And that was when the car, I guess, was driving through the mob itself. And I couldn't hear my heart beating anymore. Could barely hear the tires against the asphalt of the road driving out. But I realized, okay, now he's driving through the mob. And then after a while, the sound got a little bit lighter, and I could hear the wheels against the tires against the ground again, and I realized, okay, we've driven through. that sits with me. Those are the two memories I have very, very strongly from that year, 1957. And there's an important thing in that, because now this policeman, it was a white policeman, and I've always looked back at that moment as he risked his life too to drive me through that mob into the safety of my home. And so I've always had a special thing for policemen after that, perhaps oddly enough. But because one white policeman risked his life and saved me. I consider myself saved from that. After that, we got the really big guns out on our side when President Eisenhower sent his 101st paratroopers to help us. And the work was turned over to us individually, each of the 9. I experienced inside Central High School friendship and hate. And a lot of people who sort of stared and didn't help. Too many people who hindered. My experience inside Central High School was one of developing a very good peripheral visual for projectiles, and one of selective hearing to phase over the things that were meant to be hurtful, that were said, and to develop the sense of holding a mask for things that were done deliberately to hurt me. My thinking was, I will not give them the pleasure of knowing that they have hurt me. I will remain focused and get my education. I like to talk about the kids inside the school who saw us, and the ones who both saw us and dared make a difference, a positive difference in our lives. To the kids in Sweden, I talk about a girl named Becky who was my friend in one class. She was a friend in the class of a teacher who told me the first day that I didn't belong in that school, and she wanted me to know that she felt that way about it. And that was a teacher who I did my very best for. I do believe the course was English. And I left the feeling that I could have been Shakespeare, and she would never have given me a higher grade than a C. So my goal for her was she will never be able to give me less than a C. So, but it was just in her class that Becky sat across the aisle. And one day, and I had seen her in the halls, but I knew that friends of ours like Robin and others, there were about 10 kids in that school who were friends openly towards us, and they were treated like we were. They got the same things thrown at them, and their phones at home were harassed at night. But I'd seen Becky, but I didn't know if she, wanted to get into all of that. If she wanted me to say hello to him or to her or smile. You have to excuse me, every now and then I get a Swedish word right in the middle of all this. But just love. Okay, I'll move on. I wrote her a note and I said, Becky, I see you in the hallways, but I don't know if you want me to say hello or not. And I passed it to her. Becky wrote back, I see you in the hallways, but please don't say hello to me. And she wrote, the White Citizens Council has eyes everywhere, and I don't want them to harass harass my family and put my family in danger. But I see you. Oh, she wrote more. She said, I know they're just trash, but I don't want them to harass my family and put my family in danger. But I do see you in the hallways. And I think I speak for most understanding people here, something like that. I have this letter, and I do believe Ernest has it in, not Ernest, Terrence has it in his book. And it's true, it exists. And I think that she was right, that there are a lot of people in that school that felt exactly the way she did. They were willing to be my friend and make a difference for the moment they were there with me. but they didn't feel up to facing all the consequences to their personal lives and their families when they were away. I say, I appreciated Becky. I look forward to when I got to her classroom. I became a 14-year-old girl again there. We could talk about or make comments about things there to each other. She could befriend me there. I was not invisible to her, and that meant a lot that year. There was so much hatred in the air, and there was so much not showing your feelings and just negative things happening. It made a difference to be able to again return to 14 years old girl, talk about rock and roll music, talk about living a life of a developing young adult, being seen, not being invisible. And I would maintain that on the worst days, she gave me, in fact, courage to, despite everything, hang on to my dream of coming back the next day and making it that whole year. She was a good example of what I say is one person can make a big difference. Some action that you think is, I'm just one, I can't do so much about it, I can't get all those people outside the school to go away. But yet if you do the very little that you can do and are able to do, it will make a difference. For me, it helped me to stay in that school the whole year, as well as all the people outside of Central who were not white or were not black or just people who thought we had the right to be there and encouraged us to make it, to exercise the right that we've been given. I've perhaps talked too long now. But I thought when I saw the agenda and I saw that there was nobody on the program at that point in the making of the program, I thought there should have been someone there to say what went on inside the school. There are lots of books about all the bad things went on inside the school. And I thought I would like to tell you about Becky, one of the good things that went on inside the school. Thank you.
All right, we have two more who are going to speak about the lost year, and then we have one special person that's real young, and so we put her last. Judy Green earned a business administration degree from Philander. She did graduate work at Ouachita and University of Arkansas at Little Rock. She is president and CEO of Pond Enterprises, which began in the 80s, and from what I've read, it does everything from accounting and public relations to event planning, promotions, and even printing. She has experience in both television and in radio. The list of her professional and civic engagement is quite long, and her awards and recognition even longer. So we will also introduce the idea that she is an ordained minister. Her election and ongoing service as Justice of the Peace, District 9 in Pulaski County Quorum Court, so call her if you have a problem. And she is Vice President of Pulaski County Democratic Women and on the board of Arkansas's Women's Action for New Direction. So, Miss Judy.
Good morning. Several years ago, there was a group that came into Little Rock called the Voices of Civil Rights, and they interviewed a lot of the students from Horace Mann to get our story during the crisis. Unfortunately, I was out of the state when they did the interviews, so I didn't get in on the interviews, but I did write my civil rights memories, and I just brought a little bit of it into, I tweaked it a little bit to respect the time limit that they gave us, so I just did excerpts from it. I was one of the unfortunate students who were displaced in the 1957 through 59 school desegregation crisis when the two Little Rock high schools were closed. Horace Mann was the black high school, Central was the white high school. And during that time, there was grades 7 through 12 before they built Dunbar, before they built Horace Mann. I attended Paul Lawrence Dunbar High School through the 7th through the 9th grade. And when we were in the 9th grade, they built Horace Mann, which was the senior high school. My class was the first class to graduate from Dunbar when it became a junior high school. The next year we went to Horace Mann. 9 of my classmates attempted to attend the all-white Central High School. Governor Orville Forbes, who I will never forget, ordered both schools to be closed to prevent the black students from attending Central. The courts denied Forbes and the Little Rock School Board's request to delay the Central integration process, thus the beginning of the Central High School crisis and what is now known as the Little Rock Nine. Most of the black students' parents during that time, including mine, did not have the courage to allow their children to attend, to be one of the pioneers. And I do commend the parents of my classmates, as well as my classmates, for having the courage to take that leap and become students at Little Rock Central High School. During that year, during the year the schools were closed, all the students except the Little Rock Nine scattered, went in different directions in the world. Some of them stayed out of school the whole year. The majority of them stayed out of school the whole year. Some went to little small country town schools, and there were six of us. During that time, Dr. T.J. Rainey built a school for the Central High School students, seniors. And there were 6 of us. Philander Smith College offered an opportunity for Horace Mann seniors to complete their high school units there. And there were 6 of us who attended that school, who attended Philander Smith College. Some of them stayed at home. The majority of the students stayed at home. There were a few who went in the military, but the majority of them stayed at home. My family sent me to Detroit to go to school back during that time. They had sent out messages that most of the states did not want to accept students from Horace Mann or senior, from Little Rock, period, because they knew what was going on in this state. So a lot of them passed legislation during that time that you had to live in the state a year or 2 years before you could go to school there. That was to keep us out. Philander Smith College offered us an opportunity. In January of 1959, they offered an opportunity for Horace Mann seniors to come and finish their high school units there. After being screened and giving the regular college and entrance exams, there were 6 of us from Mann who had attended, including myself. We went to Philander under unusual circumstances. We were required to take regular college courses, which were applied towards our high school units needed to graduate from high school. And all the hours that were left over went towards our freshman year in college. This tells you about my loyalties to Philander Smith College. And when the Panther Journal came out, which was the annual yearbook, the heading was, they had a picture of all of us in there. The heading was, "An Era of Transition - Special Students." And the 6 of us had our pictures in there, along with a young man whose name was Roger Allen. Some of our classmates had gone down to Sweet Home to the school down there. I went down there one day and I didn't go back. But some of our students graduated down there. Some of our classmates graduated down there. Roger was a 12-year-old student whose father was a math teacher. And I understand he used to make up his daddy's tests. He was a 12-year-old genius. He went to Philander with us. He used to throw spitballs across the classrooms. And I remember Miss Torrance used to always tell him to act your age. You're in college now. You're not a kid anymore. Well, I attended Philander Smith College during the 58 and 59 and the 59-60 school years, where I became a majorette and with the marching band. This was during the era when Philander had a football team. It was also during the era when we integrated the lunch counters in the downtown era. Mr. Eddie Boone, who's on your next panelist, was one of my classmates, so he knows what I'm talking about. And we, a group of us from Philander, we went to Woolworths and demonstrated at the lunch counters. because they would not serve the blacks. In the spring of 1960, I interrupted my college to get married and raise a family. I returned to Philander Smith College in the fall of 1972, where I began employment there in the business office and attended every year until the summer of 1977, when I received my bachelor's degree from Philander Smith College. During that time, I took anywhere from 6 to 18 hours each semester and worked full-time at Philander. We were fortunate for this opportunity, and I will never be more grateful. I will ever be grateful to Philander Smith College. There were 200 of us graduating seniors during the year the schools were closed. We were deprived of many things, such things as a normal teenager would automatically have, and that's the high school diploma, senior prom, yearbooks, pictures, class rings, and many other amenities that seniors enjoy. I was a cheerleader during my junior year, and I was to be captain during my senior year, which I never had the opportunity to experience, even though we have had an opportunity to practice a few weeks before our school was closed. We can thank Governor Faubus for all of that. To go back a little in time, I remember when prior to the 60s, blacks had to board the city bus at the front and move to the rear of the bus, past the rear door. We had to exit from the rear, always. If the rear was full and there were vacant seats in the front, we dared not sit in the front of the bus. I remember when we had public bathrooms and water fountains that said blacks or whites. All restaurants were segregated, even black-owned restaurants. I remember one particular black-owned establishment where blacks wanted to eat, and we frequented a lot. But they had a small room in the back of the restaurant, and we had to go through the back door to go in there and eat. And the front entrance was for whites only. Of course, we eventually boycotted that establishment, along with many others, and they didn't stay in business too long. I also remember when we only had one black police officer who could only arrest blacks. Crime was not as high as it is in this decade because blacks were afraid to get arrested. They had no rights in the jails and prisons. I remember when blacks did not have the liberty to vote. In order to be able to vote, citizens were required to have a poll tax receipt. In order to purchase a poll tax receipt, you had to be a property owner. So how many of us were property owners back then? You know what I'm talking about, Judge. I think that our youth of today take the freedom which we suffered and fought for then, for them to have, or granted. They take it for granted now. We have come a long ways from when I was a youth, but we've still got a long ways to go. Through all of this, I was determined. Like they said, don't ever get up. Like the lady said, don't give up. I had the determination to succeed. I proceeded to get my college degree, got married and raised a family, and have two lovely daughters, a son, grandson, and granddaughter. My two daughters who proceeded towards their doctor's degrees. My grandson is pre-med student, and my granddaughter is a pre-psychologist at UALR. So I raised a good family. I succeeded. None of us did too bad. Most of us are business owners or we're in the business professions. And in closing, I'm going to say that when we had our 20-year class reunion, of the first reunion that the class, as I said, there were 200 of us in that graduating class who were deprived. And the first year that we had a class reunion was our 20-year class reunion. Dr. L.M. Christoph was our principal in '59, and he presented us with Momentum diplomas, and he signed them. During that time, Mr. Paul Mason was our superintendent of schools. And I thank you all for this time to get a chance to tell my story.
We are, of course, running out of time, but I definitely want to introduce you to two more people. Richard Yatta, I have known him for several years and asked him to speak along with me at historical presentations regarding Japanese experience in Arkansas, and each time I called his presentation twice removed. While he is telling you a little bit about his life and being in the lost year, and I do mean a little bit, I want to tell you that after he served in Vietnam, he earned a CPA, he's a financial planner, and has written a best-selling book on business and works as a retired consultant to small business. So, Mr. Yatta, come tell him your story real fast.
Thank you. I think I'm here because I didn't do anything. In fact, I didn't get to go to Central High. I was supposed to, but let me go back and give you some background. Back after Pearl Harbor was attacked back in 1941, my parents were farmers in California. So Executive Order 9066, which told all Japanese, citizens or not, they had to leave California and move into the interior, into camps or jail, basically. They were incarcerated. My parents had 2 weeks to get rid of everything they had, and they can only bring what they could carry. So, you know, if you can put yourself in their shoes, what can I get rid of? If you want to, some people had to sell their cars. People would offer them $5 or something, and I know one family, they were offered $5. He says, I won't sell it for $5. He just threw gas on the car and burned it. So they had that to face. You couldn't take your dog or cats or anything like that, your goldfish. Kids couldn't take their baseball bats because it was considered a weapon, as it is today in some cases. So as I was sitting there listening to the people talking, I was trying to compare and contrast what my parents went through. I remember I took my mother excuse me, to a movie called Snow Falling on the Cedars. It was about the Japanese having to evacuate the West Coast. And one of the scenes where the families were carrying what they could carry, and they were to report to a assembly center, similar to the state fairgrounds here on Roosevelt, and they were assigned a barracks to live in for 6 months until the camps were ready. But my mother was telling me there was a scene in there where the people were walking down the street and there were crowds on both sides. And she said, I remember that scene, and that they were being yelled at, shouted at, spit at, just like Elizabeth is depicted in a lot of the newsreels that we've seen. So I said, you know, that sounds like a similar story. But then they were put into the camps, into the horse stable, where they had to live for 6 months, and they didn't know where they were going. They didn't know how long. And they were sent to Roar, Arkansas, which is in southeast Arkansas by McGee and Dumas. Another family, has anyone heard of George Takei? He was Mr. Sulu in the original Star Trek, and he's on social media all the time now. So, and he's been here. His family was sent to Roar. Now, he says he remembered, he was, I think, about 4 or 5 years old, sitting in their house, and a car drives up in their driveway, and there's 2 soldiers with their rifles, a bayonet attached, with an FBI agent, came knocking on the door, and his father answered and says, time for you to leave and go to the assembly center. So, you know, if you get 2 soldiers with bayonets attached, they meant business. So there's not a whole lot they could do. You know, I even asked my father, why did you let that happen? He said, couldn't help it. We had to do it. And George's father George asked his father that, and his father just kind of looked at him, got up out of his chair, walked out of the room, and shut the door. Never said anything. They just didn't want to talk about it. And I was looking, as my parents, I was born in the camp in Roar, so as a 2 or 3 year old, you thought everybody lived that way. The times were good. A lot of kids to play with. He had no chores to do. He didn't have to take out the trash or anything. But the parents really had, I'm sure it was traumatic. And talk about losing self-esteem. I mean, they were actually imprisoned. And everybody felt like in order to be in prison, you had to do something wrong. So they had that to overcome after they got out. So as time went on, when the camps were closed after the war, 1945, a lot of the people were allowed to go back to California, where they came from, and there were reports that their homes were being shot at. The friends they used to have would cross the street to keep from talking to them as they went about their business. A lot of the things they used to have were stolen or ransacked. So they were going back to a very hostile place. George Takei's family and all the Japanese, no one would hire them. The Japanese were depicted as evil people. Through the media, the editorials would have an Asian face on a snake or an Asian face on a rat and tell them how bad the Japanese were. And the 120, I guess I have to ask the question, how many people know that there were 2 camps in Arkansas that incarcerated Japanese during World War II? About half. And that's more than usual. Not a lot of people, I think it's finally getting into the school curriculum, and people are learning about it. But anyway, my parents decided to stay. There were about 7 families that decided to stay in Arkansas. Everybody else. We had a governor named Homer Atkins back during World War II, and in order for he said he would allow the camps in Arkansas, but as soon as the war was over, the people had to leave. They could not go to school here. They could not buy property, and they just had to leave. There were a lot of doctors, lawyers, college professors, school teachers, nurses that Arkansas could have used, but they were ordered to leave. Now, why my parents stayed, I don't know. My father was from Hawaii, so if he'd gone to Hawaii, I wouldn't be here. I'd be on the beach. But they stayed and farmed, and I went to school in Scott School, which is right outside of North Little Rock. We lived out on the farm. We had to drive 5 miles towards town just to get to Cottom's. Now, a lot of you know where Cottom's is. It's a general store in Scott that turned into a restaurant and burned earlier this year. But they had the best hamburgers that you'd eat. But anyway, we lived out there, and being in the Scott School District, I went to school there until the 7th grade, and the high school was getting, the attendance were getting low. I could see that it probably closed sometime, so told my dad I wanted to go to Forest Heights to play football and basketball. And he said, okay, which surprised me. It's 20 miles away, and there were no freeways back then, and he being a farmer, he didn't have time to take me, but we did find somebody from UALR that took me back and forth. But when I was at Forest Heights, that's when 1957, I was in the 9th grade in 1957, and I was going to go to Central the following year. And I had my schedule. I was ready to go. I was looking forward to going. They had a great football team that 57. And then they closed the school. So that's why I'm here today, because I didn't go to school. But I enjoyed going to school because my parents were vegetable farmers. So whenever I was out of school, I was out in the field. Now, someone was talking about incarceration, or in the paper today about how the prisons are getting overrun, too many people. But I can tell you, if they grew an okra patch at all the prisons and made them pick that, the population of the prison would go down to half. Okra grows from June until the first frost, and it's a hard job. So that's how I grew up. That's why I love school. I love going to school because on a holiday I was out in the field working. But not being able to go to Central High was disappointing. Yes, ma'am? You trying to tell me to hurry up. Okay, we'll wrap it up. But as I was going to, the Scott's school system was closed, so the high school was closed, and I was in the Pulaski County school system. To go back a little bit, going back to the school, when we moved to Scott, Arkansas, it's in the Pulaski County School District. They had a board meeting to decide what school we were going to go to, whether it be the black schools or the white schools. So I was kind of a tweener. I didn't know which way to go. So one of the ladies at the farm we were living on, she owned a lot of land in Scott. Her name was Virginia Alexander, that a lot of you may know, but owned a lot of property in Scott. She just stood up in the meeting and said they're going to the white school, and the meeting was over. So back then, the difference in the education between the white and black schools, the white schools were getting most of the funding. The black schools were getting shortchanged on the amount of funds that they were given to run a school. So there was a little disparity as far as the quality of education. So for me, it was a life-changing event where I did get to go to school. Today, I would say the people of Scott, Arkansas were probably very gracious. They invited us to all the church activities, community activities, and even all of Central Arkansas. They were great to our family. So, but I was forced to go into, well, I was not forced, but I was in the Air Force ROTC at the University of Arkansas, and there was an advanced ROTC program where they pay you $50 a month just to go to school, but you had to commit to go into the military afterwards. So $50 a month was a lot of money for me. And I was sitting there thinking, it's in 1963. We hadn't had a war in 10 years, so I'll just go in. And they had a draft. We had to go in somehow, somewhere. I wasn't married at the time, so I knew I was going to have to go in, so I said, might as well go in as an officer. So our senior year, we had to go to a camp, and as we were walking to our barracks, someone said, hey, did you hear about the Gulf of Tonkin? I said, oh, God. So I graduated just in time for the Vietnam War. I got assigned to a flight school, flew B-52s. We were having a conversation the other day about fear. I said, you know no fear unless you've been shot at by guns or missiles being shot at you. When your electronic officer says there's a missile coming, the co-pilot, look out your right window, it should be coming that way. So a B-52 is slow. So we have to see it and have it miss. So I'm fortunate to have flown 59 combat missions and still be alive today. During that time, again, being in the military in an unpopular war, friends of ours are getting yelled at, spit at, being in the United States Air Force. And some were having mob violence attacked by them, or focused toward them. And then you compare that to what my parents went through, what the Little Rock Nine went through, and the pictures that you see with Elizabeth Eckford walking down the street, just kind of heartbreaking. Fortunately, I've had the privilege to meet Elizabeth Eckford. She went on a school tour that's sponsored by the National Park Service to Roar last year, and she and I had good conversation, and I very much admire her and the other Little Rock Nine members for their courage and some of the things they had to go through. And Elizabeth told me about one thing, going down the halls of Central High. She said that once a day, probably twice a day, that someone would body slam them right into the lockers. And one of the guys figured out and said, hey, if we could walk closer to the lockers when they body slam us, we won't go too far. So, you know, hearing that story just kind of breaks your heart, the things they had to go through and what they had to do to get an education and just get through the day. And for that, for all what they went through, I admire them. I look to them as my hero, even though I wasn't really affected by it, other than I couldn't go to school there. They were brave, and I appreciate what they've done. I appreciate the way the state of Arkansas treated my family and myself as I grew up. We're not finished yet, but the state of Arkansas was very gracious as compared to what people went through in California. And I wake up every day with an attitude of gratitude. You know, when challenges hit, I remember my father I said, hey, I want to quit doing this. He said, you're not going to quit today. You can quit tomorrow. And every day, I think of that. So basically, he said, you're not going to quit. Never give up. Just like the Little Rock Nine went through, never give up, never quit. And I got more to say, but I think I'll quit right here as time's running out.
Thank you, Mr. Yatta. Phyllis Brown is the baby sister of Minnijean Brown, and she was 9 years old when the Central High crisis erupted. Phyllis didn't follow in her sister's footsteps. She did not attend Central High. She graduated from Horace Mann, but she did follow her sister and Thelma Mothershed and attended college at Southern Illinois University. Phyllis was a 15-year-old volunteer at SNCC. Do you know SNCC? That's Southern Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, who did great work in Arkansas, and she remains a community activist, and she's going to speak for a short amount of time. Bless you all.
Hello. Right. I will be brief because you said that you were saving. Hello. I bet that woke you up, huh? Stretch. Ugh. We do need to stretch, folks, and I will be brief. Yes, I am the baby sister of Minnijean Brown. I was the tag-along sister. I followed her like a little puppy. All right? And because I was the tag-along sister, that meant that I got to sit at the feet of the Little Rock Nine. All right? At Thelma's house, at Elizabeth's house, at Melba's house. And I'll tell you a cute little story. I hope you'll laugh. Is that Melba and Minnijean wore those big old crinoline slips. Do you recall that? Can? Oh, by the way, Judy, I didn't know you were an ordained minister. All right. And where do you preach? Okay, sorry, I diverted. Okay, anyway. Online? Okay, anyway. So Melba would come to our house because we lived 1 block from Melba, right? And I was probably the worst little sister on earth. All right? I know I was, I admit it. And I always had sore throats, right? And our mother was a nurse, and she would say, Phyllis, gargle with warm salt water. Well, I wanted to hear what Melba and Minnijean were talking about, all right? Hold this for a minute.
Yes, ma'am. Right. Is that Elizabeth in the back? stand up, Elizabeth. You're a great lady.
Can you believe he took over my story? All right? So because I wanted to hear everything Minnijean and Melba were talking about, I did go make my warm salted water, and I sat there right next to them and went, right. Does that sound bratty? A little bad sister? Well, that's okay. All right. Yeah, I did want to follow in her footsteps, but ain't no way I was going to go to Central High because I wanted to go to the prom. And I knew the only way that I would go to the prom was that I had to get a colored boy to take me, right? And so I did follow in her footsteps somewhat, and that is I attended Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, Illinois. Probably a life-changing event for me because I wasn't relegated to just being around black people. I had a neighbor from Bangladesh and another neighbor from Jamaica and another neighbor from Norway, and my life became enriched. Now, I could cry about my sister, but going to Carbondale was really life-altering for me. And so when my sister was expelled from Central High, she was taken away from me. Judge Brandon? Yeah, and so who was going to dance with me? Who was going to comb my hair? Who was going to tie the bow behind my dress? Who was going to walk me to school? And I want Orville Farbers, and I want all those white segregationists, and I want Tom Cotton, and I want you all to know that all of you who participated in that vicious, vicious attack, I will never forgive you. You can apologize and say, I'm sorry. Well, George Wallace apologized on his deathbed, all right? I will not accept your apology for what you did to me. Now, all the rest of you, you can recover and move on, all right? But I had to play with two brothers. I wanted my sister. And so when I read this, the title of Reflections in Progress, I wanted to know where was the question mark behind the word progress, all right? And so when Lottie Shackleford talked about what a big deal it was to graduate from high school, well, it's because at one time it was a punishable crime to educate black children in this country. And here we are again, 2017, with the same policies, legal and judicial policies that are trapping black kids in segregated and unequal education. So Janice Kearney and Griff Stockley took us back. It's the same thing was happening. We're experiencing the same things. So now we have a school administration that's taking our tax dollars to fund charter schools. How many schools have closed in Little Rock? Isn't that what this is all about? The last year? All right? And so do know that those white women that wore those white gloves and wore those coolie hats, that's what they were called, coolie hats. They look like little flying saucers. They were members of the Mothers League who created a campaign so that for voters to vote to shut the schools down. Yes, all of your, and when Gloria talked about, she walked to the window and she saw all those contorted, vicious, violent faces. Those were the mothers and fathers and grandmothers and grandfathers of the students who attended Central. And so I guess when education will become as paramount as football, because when the governor shut down the schools, he said, well, at least we can still have football. Yay, team. All right, no education, but we're gonna still have football. And so this country spends more on football and war than you do on education. But yet, who was that said yes? And oh, it was Judge Branton that said it. And when he said it, I cringed. I love this country. Well, I don't. And Dr. Carolyn, yes, so everybody likes to say that Little Rock was progressive and moderate. And I'm trying to figure out, is it because you had one less lynching than Mississippi? Is that why you're progressive and moderate? You only had 365 and Mississippi had 366? All right, so on Tuesday morning, when we go back to work and we begin to alchemize our sins into virtues, yes, here we are, celebrating Go Central, Go Tigers. Remember that those same mechanisms are still working, that still deprive these children. Well, they even deprived me, and that was 60 years ago. You disrupted households. You bombed Carlotta's house. But more importantly, you took my sister away from me, and I'll never forgive you for it.
Thank you, Phyllis. Thank you all, and I appreciate each of the panelists for their remarks.
How are you doing?
Fantastic, fantastic. Good to see you too.
We'll see. Well, I think they're in the building. We'll see. Yeah. Whoa. I know y'all have a lot of kids. We can do that. Okay. What up? You want to sit up on stage? Yeah. Well, I'm gonna do a brief introduction and I'll do it. Yeah, I will. Right. Oh. I don't have time for that. Yeah.
Have it packaged to go?
Yeah, send it with me.
We'll have it to go.
Yeah, if you don't mind. For me, I think she's gonna.
I will have it ready to go.
Okay. Listen. Hello. Hello, hello, hello. If we can quiet down a little bit, I realize we are running short of time, so we're gonna kind of try to fit this in. My name is Rhonda Stewart. I am the Genealogy and Local History Specialist at the Central Arkansas Library System's Butler Center for Arkansas Studies. So what I do is research local history. I am also a granddaughter of Willie Toombs, who was one of the plaintiffs in the Aaron versus Cooper case. So I am a seed of the crisis. That history was planted in me, and I grow, and as I grow, I continue to sprout bits and pieces of that history, and I'm thankful. I'm thankful because without the Central High crisis, my life would be totally different than what it is now. But because I have learned to love and learn to love and still love to learn, I am blessed with the opportunity to introduce to you some panelists that will talk about what's happened since the crisis. First of all, I will say that our first two speakers will be members of the Little Rock Nine, and you have to forgive us because this is a very busy day. They will be exiting almost as soon as they finish speaking because they have other events they must attend. So let me give you a brief introduction of the panelists, and then we'll get started. First of all, one of our youngest members is Crystal C. Mercer, is Little Rock born. She's the proprietor of Columbus Creative Arts and Activism and Sapphire Fabric Market. Her artistic talents have been displayed around the state in New York and Canterbury, England. She fuses arts and activism by using theater and textiles to tell social justice narratives through merchandising and storytelling. Her public service complements the public service of her father, civil rights lawyer, attorney Christopher C. Mercer, Jr. Dr. Laverne Bell Tolliver is Little Rock born, an associate professor of social work with over 40 years experience as a master's level clinical social worker, a licensed certified social worker in the state of Arkansas, registered play therapist, supervisor, and a clinical member of the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy. Her experience includes mental health, child protective services, and private practice. She earned her PhD in family therapy at Texas Women's University. She also serves as senior pastor of Bullock Temple Christian Methodist Episcopal Church. Coach Eddie Boone graduated from Holman High School in Stuttgart, Arkansas, Philander Smith College in Little Rock, and the State College of Arkansas, now known as University of Central Arkansas in Conway. He is a charter member of the National Federation of Interscholastic Coaches Association, now the National Association for International Athletics, NAIA, lifetime member of the Arkansas Activities Association, Little Rock Retired Classroom Teachers Association, Arkansas Education Association, National Education Association, retired activity supervisor with the City of Little Rock Parks and Recreation, a member of Canaan Baptist Church since 1977. He was married to the former Lorraine Easterlin. She's deceased and shares with her 3 children and 4 grandchildren. Melba Patillo Bills is a member of the Little Rock Nine and has been an ambassador of Little Rock since 1957. She is the daughter of Howell and Lois Payton Patillo. Her roots in the state are in the state prior to the Civil War. She earned a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism from San Francisco State and a Master's from Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. She has authored 2 award-winning books, Warriors Don't Cry and White is a State of Mind. Carlotta Walls Lanier is the youngest of the Little Rock Nine and has been an ambassador of Little Rock since 1957. She is the daughter of Carter Lou and Juanita Robinson Walls. She attended Michigan State University and earned a BS from Colorado State College, now University of Northern Colorado. Her Arkansas roots are deep into the 1860s. She continued the family trade of self-employment when operating her real estate brokerage firm in Colorado. And with that, I'd like to start this part of the section by giving Melba Patillo Bills an opportunity to speak to you all.
I want to reverse you. I'm sorry. I'm going to reverse your decision because Carlotta Lanier has information that goes prior to mine.
Okay.
I'm not being bitchy, but
that's okay. We can do it like that.
Okay. Thank
you. Is it still morning? Good morning. Yes, Melba would like for me to probably speak first, since what I'd like to say up front is this. I am the only one of the group living today that experienced 1959, 1960 at Little Rock Central High School. I speak the name of Jefferson Thomas, who was also with me. They graduated with me in May of 1960. We are 2 that experienced that year without the troops. I think we are the only, and in fact I know we are the only 2 that from the 10th grade through the 12th grade that experienced everything that you heard before, in the middle of the lost year, and then the year of graduating in May of 1960. I would like to say and uplift those that were helpful to Jefferson and I in the 12th grade. We did not have the troops. We did not have the extra help to protect us during that particular time, but that did not say that we did not have problems. We continued to have problems with some of those that were determined to keep us out. But the leadership, I think, did not want to go through the 1957-58 time frame. So my senior class members took a little bit extra effort in trying to quell some of the things that were going on. Unfortunately, in February of 1960, my home was bombed. I was fortunate enough, my mother and two sisters and myself happened to be on the other side of the home and was able to be here to tell you about it. My father, unfortunately, was, because of the fact that he was having trouble getting jobs when they would find out that he was the father of one of those at Central, was not there, and because he was working at his father's cafe at the time. It happened around 10:30, and because he was not there, he was considered a suspect, along with my friend who lived up the street by the name of Herbert Muntz. I'd like to put his name into the records as well, who spent he was incarcerated for 5 years for bombing my home, which I knew he had not done. I hear that there are a couple of professors here in Little Rock that is trying to get his records expunged. I hope that does happen. I understand it is on the governor's desk, and I would hope that they would see to it. It was no way possible that he could have done that. We knew it. Unfortunately, without having the legal help extended to him, he could only afford so much, and unfortunately, he spent 18 months of that 5 years in prison here in Arkansas. But I will say with that, in May of 1960, Jefferson and I graduated. And let me tell you, I knew that I had completed the task that I started. I needed that diploma. That diploma validated everything that I had gone through. And that very next day, I caught the first thing smoking out of Little Rock. So Bowen never ever did return, and I did 6 years later, and since then, I have come back to Little Rock. I see a lot of changes. I see some progress going on. I see progress going on in our country. I also see that there is a necessity for us to be vigilant about what is going on in our country, speak up, get involved, vote, help change what is going on in this country. As you know, there are people who are trying to reverse what is going on, all of the progress that we have made. And that's pretty much what I really would like to say today. So thank you very much for that opportunity.
Good morning. I'm being requested that I move a little bit to the center so you can, I suppose, see my face. I'm Melba, Dr. Melba Patello-Beals. I think that perhaps what I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about what happened, and then you can ask a question or two. So think about what you want to ask me. After the Little Rock Central High incident, prior to when Carlotta went back, most of us were told to get out of Little Rock because we were under great pressure, and the Ku Klux Klan was offering 10,000 dead, 5,000 alive. At that point, I had a relative who was passing for white in Georgia, who was at the same time a policeman and wearing that white sheet at night, called up and told my grandmother that they're serious. Get her out, and get her out now. Get her out as soon as you can. So my mother started sewing clothes for me, and everybody else got out. They put me on a plane because I remained there a year. But during this time, right afterwards, everybody got out of Little Rock. And what happened was the NAACP sought avenues for us to get out, and there were avenues sought all over the place. a couple of families, and in many instances, families either sponsored us or contributed to or whatever to help us get settled in other places. If you're going to talk to us, each one of the 9 of us has a different settlement story. I'll share just moments of yours. I was sent from here to San Francisco, California, where I almost had a heart attack. I wanted to go and live with a black family. I wanted my own cell phone and a subscription to Ebony magazine. However, when I got off the plane, 13 white people met me, and they all rushed toward me to hug me. Now, if you're from Little Rock, ain't no white folks rushing toward you to hug you unless they got a rope in their back pocket. So it wasn't a happy greeting for me, but it would turn out to change my life, because among those people would come the woman and man who I would now grow into calling my mother and father, and who would serve that purpose in my life, because indeed, he turned out to be Dr. George McCabe, the founder of Sonoma State University in Sonoma, California. My mother was an activist, and she, combined with my birth mother, were both very pushy ladies. That's the only way to put it. You either achieve or don't come home. And if you come home and you haven't achieved enough, you're going to go back and redo it again. So the collaboration between my mother, who'd been a professor, and those people in Santa Rosa was shattering for me, because there's no way out. But on the other hand, my father changed my name, would not let me use my first name, but maybe use Joy, would not allow me to have any interviews by the press, took away all of my privileges in terms of this, that, or the other. You ain't a star, baby. You got to make it through school like the rest of us. And what's going to do you some good is some homework. We ain't traveling nowhere. We ain't taking no speaking fee. We're going to have to earn our money from the baseline. Please go make your bed, okay? And check with me when you got your housework done. So when I first got there, I was frightened to death, because out here I'm living with white folks who, you know, I don't know what they're going to do to me at night, but they built me a bed by hand, my daddy did. And from that moment on, he said to me one thing, which later on I would realize would build within me my own self-esteem and my own sense of equality. He said to me, look here, you are never less than my daughter, never less than my child, and that's how it's going to be always. No one can deny you anything, because you are not meant to be denied anything. When I was taken downtown to the Santa Rosa swimming pool and forbidden to swim, my father got the rest of his teacher friends from Sonoma State University. They put signs in the air and they said, hey, we're going to march till you let her swim. When the neighbors came over to say, what is a nigger doing in our neighborhood, my father got a bucket. They started throwing rocks. And I thought, what is Daddy going to do? He got a bucket of rocks and threw them back. So they were very baseline, not very wealthy, but straight-line people who were teachers. And my mother was a Quaker. They were both Quakers. And they were fighters for voter rights, for preschools. And my mother set up the only public television station ever set up in Santa Rosa, California. And she would drag me around by my hand. It was so funny, because at her funeral, everybody looked at me, and I was the only black person there. And they all said, oh, my goodness, that's why your mother dragged you around all the time with her. She kept you with her, you know. And they wondered, people in town wondered who I was, because there were very few black people there. But the McCabe stood up against whatever happened, and they showed me a lot, not by what they said, but by their behavior, by how they treated me. My father took me to school on the first day to register, and the people looked at him like he was crazy, and he said, this is my daughter, I'm here to register her for school. She's ready to start college today. So each of you, if you'll check with us, has as heart-wrenching stories about where we went and what we did. Some went off directly to university, like Ernie Green did, go directly. And each of us then went through that whole process of orienting ourselves to adulthood, of orienting ourselves to life. But among our greatest needs during this period was a healing. We had to find our balance. Who are we? Why are we on earth? Why are they taking pictures of us? What are we going to do later? Was what we done? The most important question that hung in the air, as Carlotta mentioned, was, have we done the right thing? And when we received the Congressional Gold Medal of Honor in the White House, it hit us all. Yeah, you did. You did what you were supposed to do. You did what God assigned you to do. You did the right thing. And many people will benefit. Now, as children, teenagers, we did not understand that. We did not totally understand why. Even though Martin Luther King said to us, I remember saying to him, complaining, And he said, hey, look here, Melba, you are not doing this for yourself. Don't be selfish. You are doing this for generations yet unborn, for people you've not met, for people you will never see. And I didn't understand that at all. So I didn't understand how what we did was, as Minnijean said last night, an international act, certainly a national act, and an act which affected the people of Arkansas. In my mind's eye, the white people who were in Central High School and those who were battling against us, we were all going through a lesson. And all of it was a part of kind of an orchestration of a higher power to determine that we all learned this lesson, that either we're going to make it together or we ain't going to make it. And as long as one of us is not free, none of us is free. And so it was a huge, hard-fought lesson which would affect me for the rest of my life. For example, therapists say the reason I lose weight and gain it, lose it and gain it, is because when I'm fat, I feel less vulnerable. I feel you're not going to hit me as hard, or you're going to back off, you probably won't hit me. I've had psychological fears all my life. Every one of us has some residue left about what happened to us, because it's not fun to walk down the hallway knowing that you're going to be hit in a minute or whatever, but we've all lived with. People ask questions, do we stay in touch? You know we do. One historian says that out of the 9 of us, 5 of us are blood cousins. Whatever we are, we're related to each other, and we love each other with all our hearts. We miss Jefferson. I miss him like he were here today. He is with us, we know that. We miss each other. I miss Gloria. I told her yesterday like she was here. I love Minnijean. She's the party girl. Hey now. And I miss her telling me what to do next, because I'm kind of boring. Carlotta's in charge. If you got a social engagement, you need to be organized. She's going to do it for you, okay? She's the one who was the main mentor of our Little Rock 9 Foundation, and she's a very hard-working lady, and we know she's in charge. You got to know where things are. When Mr. Ernie Green speaks, we follow, okay? Because he's the eldest of us, and he's also bitchy if you don't follow, you know what I'm saying? Terry is here to abuse us, tell us jokes, help us going, and give us a kind of a spiritual thing. We all blend together, and that blend is one of love. We have respect for each other. We couldn't have made it through that without each other. And it was as though God said, hey, I'm going to mix you a formula, and when I put it together, when I put all your personalities together, it will fall into place. And you will see how you will each enable each other. And every single time we get together, every single one of us falls into that same pattern. Ernie becomes the boss, Carlotta becomes the organizer. If she says, get the hell to the airport by 7 a.m., I know my butt better be near the airport by 7 a.m. or it's over, right? So we all take our parts up. You know, Gloria's the dignified, knowing the history, interested, she's going to inform us. Everybody has a role. And how do I feel about this? Is that it's, as Ernie said yesterday, it's a unique experience. I will never, ever be as close to anyone on the planet as I am to these people, because these are the people that know what really happened to us. At that age, we could not talk to our mother nor our father. Later on, our sons, our children are all interrelated, know each other, talk to each other, and they will all say how it affected their lives. Of course they affected their lives, but you know, we didn't go around saying to our babies, look here, we're with the Little Rock 9, we're really important, we helped history. I didn't say anything to my kids, they didn't even know. I remember with my boys, when I was 50 years of age, I adopted a set of identical twins. My boys went to school one day and they came home when they were 5 and they said, hey, we saw this book in the library, Warrior something or other, I think Don't Cry, was it Crying? And then there was this black woman in the back, they said, Mama, she looked like you except she had on makeup, you know, you could look a lot better than you do. So it wasn't like, and I remember somebody came to the door to interview me and they said, no, she doesn't live here. And they said, wrong house, slammed the door. And so it wasn't like we were busy living as stars, Little Rock 9. No, we all have individual lives. Gloria Kalmar, for example, has lived her life I'm gonna get this wrong, Sweden, all right, with her kids and her husband in Sweden. Minnijean Tricky lived a lot of her life in Canada, has lived back and forth, been a social worker, she's always a grassroots organizer, always going to speak her mind and always going to point a direction, choose it if you want. People have played different roles. I was an NBC newscaster. For me, the news people who were here set a tone. I realized when I watched them operate, You know what? If it's in the news, it's really hard to hang somebody when somebody's writing down, got a camera going. So I grew up to become a news reporter for NBC. I was a news reporter for ABC Network. And then when I got through doing that, I taught it and ran a public relations company. So I really did believe that exposure in the news is what gets it. The last 16 years of my life, I was a professor, and then I went on to retire and to start writing books. Each of us has a very interesting pathway that we've climbed, interesting things that we've all done in our lives. And so you would have to look up each of the individual histories to get them. But we all grew up with the blessings of the Lord Jesus. That's how I feel. What could have happened to us didn't. When they gave us those incredible statues downtown at the Capitol, we all looked at each other and said, huh. I remember Terry walking around with his beautiful grandson, and we all looked at each other and said, hey, you know, yeah, we like the statues, but we didn't know we'd live this long. And so the same thing when we got together the first night we were here. How would you say you was? Oh, okay, well, I'm 75 too. You gonna be 76 when? Minnijean busy telling me I'm due for another birthday. You think I wanna hear that? No, I don't. So this is what we know. We know that in the earth and on the earth, only love is a healer. If you're not taking care of things and looking at what's going on around you, get off your butt and do so. It is you who decides what happens in the future. You know, don't forget where we came from. I never forget. Don't tell me we haven't made some progress, people. I remember being that little girl who rode on that bus in the back of the bus. I remember sitting in the front of the bus, getting on and being slapped by the busman, and my grandmother dragging me to the back. I remember those water fountains. I thought to myself, well, hell, I got a crayon. Who the hell's going around putting all these signs on everything that says white only? I just need some paper and a pen. I can redo this. Give me a moment, right? I don't need this. And this is what is sad about life here. When I was 4 years of age, I said to my mother, where do we come from? Where did I come from? She said, well, darling, you were on the roof by the stork, of course, like everybody else. The stork comes around, and you have the privilege. And so I said, well, okay. So I got my red wagon, went to the front of the house, and sat there for days and days and days. To this day, I know you better wear a sun hat, because it hurt the top of my head, the sun did. You know what I was waiting for? I wanted that stork to come by and pick my butt up and get me out of here. Because I figured if he could deliver, he could pick up. Okay? That was my reasoning. That's how badly I felt about the fact of watching my parents transform in the household from these interesting people to when we went to the local grocery store. Yes, sir? No, sir? My grandmother reached for a box of baking powder one day. I said, you know, you can't do that. You can't take things off the shelf. We take them off. She stood in line to get meat. Somebody else came in, we'd be knocked out of line. So people say to us sometimes, why did you want to go to Central Hospital? I bet you wanted to marry somebody white. My grandmother used to say to me, hey, you ain't courting until you're 18, and you sure the heck ain't getting married now. So that's not a purpose. That was never on any of our minds. You know what? We just wanted a better education. All right, that's all. Like there's some big, huge reason. Everybody says, why did you go to Central High School? Because we wanted a better life for our children, and we wanted a better education. With that, I will say, namaste, that the God in me is the God in you. We are all the same. There is no difference. The same feelings of honor and courage that helped me go through the incredible experience of being in Central High School that would mark me and my family for the rest of our life rests in you. And you have to just move ahead. March on. My grandmother used to say when I complained, she said, hey, march forward, girl, move on. The load is heavy, train is hot, it's whiny, you're carrying a heavy load, but you gotta keep moving on. So I tell you, it ain't perfect, but it's better. And it's not as perfect as I thought it'd be, but it's okay. I'm gonna keep moving on. What are you gonna do? I will now take a couple questions. Thank you for listening. Thank you for coming here. Thank you for caring. Yes, sir.
My name is Joseph Washington, and I grew up in Pine Bluff. And this is a general question, but I want to get it in. What role, if any, did the church play in the education?
Church was a crucial role in the organization of Central High School and all of us. You have to understand that prior to that time, Church was our source of news, our source of police, our source of any policing we got, our source of doctoring, our source of law. It was everything. Nobody else cared about us but our minister and the rest of the people who attended. So that if I need my teeth done, or if I needed something done legally, what our income tax, I'd go to church, because that's where I want to get some help. Church was everything in my life. It was the only thing in my life that provided me with the power, and the people at that church were the ones who backed us up. Bethel AME Church was something I knew from diaper time. And my mother, I buried a few years back, and I'll never forget, they showed me this Sunday school book in which she had marked down, they had marked down her contribution to Bethel AME Church for some almost 50 years. And the fact that she taught Sunday school. So for me, you need to know, and for most of us, a religion of some description was the absolute key driving force in our lives. There wasn't a day or a moment that I didn't pray. And when I got into the worst trouble, when people were putting bombs on my head at Central High, I said the Lord's Prayer to see how many times I could say it. It's 13.5 times up 3 flights of stairs. So yeah, there ain't no life without church. I don't have a life today without it. There is no life without God. I've just written a book to them. I just don't have a life without God. God is always here, always will be with all of us, in whatever form we expect to see him. There is no life. So one more question? I got to go. We never got a dime from the state. It cost my parents a lot of money to go through that. Illnesses, hardships, and whatnot. No one ever offered a dime. We didn't take a dime. No one ever paid a dime to us. Any money that was given to the NAACP was utilized for things across the country. To people who object, by the way, to the expenditure of any cash or whatever on us for this celebration we're having, I'll say one thing. You know what? Until you walk in my shoes, baby, until you've been where I've been, don't you make no comment about whether or not we've made progress, okay? Don't you say a thing about what's going on. We are here because we need you to bring us here. We're here because we hope our gathering will inspire and will help somebody to keep moving forward. That's the only reason we're here. And when we say somebody, I mean both whites or blacks. We're not talking about just black folks. For example, let me tell you what we think. See, people always assume what they think I'm thinking. I wouldn't be here today without the rabbis, without the lawyers, without the, you know what my sons' names are? Matthew Thurgood Patello and Evan Marshall Patello, for a reason. For a reason, okay? So we wouldn't be here without the attorneys, and we wouldn't be here without the white people who sneaked over and helped us around, that woman who stood and walked Elizabeth out of there. We wouldn't be here without the white news reporters that wrote what they wrote, or the white people that brought food over when we didn't have it. So this is not a single-oriented project. This is a cooperative project. Yeah, there were some really bad white folks, but let me say something. There were some really good ones who risked their lives to see that we got out. Some really good ones. Some nice soldiers who laid their lives on the line to see to it that I didn't get all that acid in my eye. He slammed my head beneath the water and ran me out so I could get help. So let us not make any conclusions about anybody. And people say about all of us, who of us hates somebody? None of us do. We don't have an ounce of hate in our system for anybody. We just think one thing. It is love that will save the world. May God bless you. Thank you for listening.
All right. 6 decades of education, and it was nice to have that summed up. 6 decades of education. And rightfully so, we should reflect on the progress. We have other members of this committee, this panel, and I would like to just start off by asking them a few questions, and you can sit at your seat and respond. You each have microphones. But what is right about the Little Rock School District since 1957? And Coach Boone, let's start off with you. What is right? Oh, yeah. Okay. Yes. It's hot.
Well.
Just put it up to your mouth.
Okay. what is right?
Well, I can't really speak for what's right now because times are different. In 1974, when I came to Central as the basketball/football coach, we had an enrollment was about 70 to 30. We had more whites than we had blacks. And all the years I worked there for 20 years, I was not the first Afro-American coach. Coach Crater had coached there before me. Coach Johnny Greenwood was there for 1 year. I spent 20 years at Central. I saw 5 different principals in that span. And in 1994, I retired from coaching. But I had diversity on all, there was a lot of diversity on the football team, basketball team, track team, and we had big participation out of all those kids. But you don't see that today. It's kind of changed. You just have a few, most of the private schools, and it's taken away a lot of the good athletes, a lot of the good students. They've gone to the private sector, and that's where it's not like it was when I came earlier.
So just to remind everybody who I am, I'm Crystal C. Mercer. I am the daughter of the late attorney Christopher C. Mercer, Jr., who was the field secretary for the NAACP during the 1957 crisis year and practiced law for 59 years until the end of his life in November of 2012. I'm also a 2001 graduate of Central High School, and I feel like what is right is that I had the opportunity, because of the Little Rock Nine, because of the NAACP, because of Mr. Wiley Brenton Sr., because of my father and so many other players, to attend Central High School and receive that education and diploma, and since has moved on to other things. But what's right is already right. It's already working. And I'm in a place now where I want to focus on what's wrong so we can fix it. And there are a lot of things that aren't right, and people have mentioned it. Oh, we've come a long way, but we have a long way to go. We have a really long way to go because we are regressing. So the things that have worked in the past, or that are working, that students are receiving in education, people should have equal access to education. People should have equal access and representation to equitable education in the city of Little Rock.
I'm Laverne Bell Tolliver, and I need to say first that I'm part of what you call Phase 2. I was one of 25 students who desegregated the junior high schools in Little Rock. Four of the 5 at that time junior high schools, which were grades 7 through 9, were desegregated in 1961, and then the final school, which was Pulaski Heights, was desegregated in 1962. And that was Phase 2, and Phase 3 was the desegregation of the elementary schools. And I would like to say that what's right, what's going on right, is that there are some schools, including Central High School, who are excelling in their academics. However, there are 3 high schools that are on the distress, and like Crystal and others, I believe that we need to work on that. There are some